Share Conference presents Smari mcCarthy.
Hello. Why? Wait, I ate way too much ice cream. So I was asked to come and talk to you about the democratization movement in Malta. But I found that a bit strange. I normally talk about very different stuff, kind of transparency and access to information, that kind of stuff. But back in 2007, I did some interesting thinking about, well, I thought it was interesting, I'm not sure anybody else did, but it was about how societies work. And it turns out societies are really, really messy things. You have all sorts of complexity arising from all of the interactions between all of the people. Every time you have lots of people coming together, you have resource strife or resource disagreements, you have all these interpersonal relationships, you have difficulties with land management and so on. And it's just really difficult to deal with. And it basically turns out that we tend to try and hide a lot of all this complexity behind all sorts of simplified structures. And one of the reasons that these structures emerge is that people are very different. Some people are much more kind of strong leaders than others. Some are more arrogant. Some are more likely to stand up in front of a bunch of people and talk about his ideas. And then there's this entire class of people who could be called venture warlords. They're the people who, back in the old days, like several centuries ago, before there were major settlements, they were the people who kind of went into these kind of tribes and took over and said, we're going to build an empire. And kind of a lot of what we now see as modern hierarchical structures stem from this kind of venture warlordism thing. So you get a kind of emergence of political hierarchies and power groups that manifest their power through social coercion, through manipulation of ideas, and so on. And slowly but surely you get more formalized structures which are very capable of getting certain things done really fast, but other things are depressingly terrible depending on how low in the food chain you are. So when we talk about all this stuff, a lot of people just decide to look at the institutional hierarchies and say, well, okay, this is a fairly reasonable way of understanding the world. But is it necessarily the best unit to look at the world? Because when you're looking at institutions and institutional power, you're actually abstracting a lot of the complexity away. You're hiding the complexity behind the institutions. And maybe individuals could be a better measure of how society works. So, back on the internet, where I come from, we have the saying that we reject kings and presidents and voting, and we believe in rough consensus and running code. What this means in practice is that when you're on a networked reality, then Plato's kind of comment from back several thousand years ago really makes a lot of sense. He said that one of the penalties, or the penalty for not engaging in political discourse, is that you end up being ruled by people who are inferior to you. Now, we could flip that around and say, well, if you're not going to participate in the network, then you're probably going to end up in a hierarchy, and you're probably going to end up pretty low in it. So when we look at modern democratic society, then we normally see lots of people, and they tend to engage with politics through all sorts of parties, and then at the top you might have some sort of legislative assembly. And this is very convenient if you happen to be one of the guys who runs one of the parties. And it's been justified for several centuries by people like Thomas Hobbes, who discussed the idea of bellum omnium contra omnes, the war of all against all. He was advocating in Leviathan for a strong centralized society where kings or higher up people would be in charge of making sure that we, the idiots, wouldn't end up killing each other. But some people have talked about direct democracy. And direct democracy is a bit difficult. It's not necessarily the most easy way of doing things, because it means that everybody has to be fully informed about everything, or they're just going to make really bad decisions. Back in the Enlightenment era, there was this kind of move towards democratization, where the idea was, let's enlighten everybody and let's have democracy. And, well, a lot of people picked up on the democracy part, but I don't really feel particularly enlightened. So, when we're dealing with democracy, any kind of democracy, it more or less comes down to voting. There's a lot of other things which matter. There's the deliberations, there's the discussions amongst ourselves, there's opinion making and so on. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the question of either you say yes or no, or you abstain. You just say, I'm not going to participate in this. So the idea that I had back in 2007 was, what happens if we add the third option? What happens if we say, let's allow, I don't know anything about agriculture, but I have some friends and some relatives who are really, really smart about agriculture stuff. So what happens if I just give them my vote in those issues? And, I can take it back whenever I want. That would be a very important design feature. But you want to be able to have more flow than we've traditionally had, where, in the modern kind of democratic systems, we give our only vote to some guys in some political party, and maybe they'll get in, maybe they won't, and then they have it regardless of what they do for the next 4 years, or 5 years, or whatever the term length is. So that's a terribly conflated thing where you have to trust people to do more or less what you want them to and not what they would do for other reasons for an entire 4 years. So this vote proxying idea, you could do it on a general basis. You could say, I'm just going to trust you for everything. That's kind of what we do today. But you could also do it on a per topic issue, like you could say agriculture or healthcare. Maybe I'm not really good at making decisions on healthcare issues, but I'm really smart about technology. So I'm going to take care of all the democratic stuff regarding technology stuff myself and hand my friend who's a doctor my vote regarding healthcare issues. Right? And then you can do it on a per issue basis, because sometimes, there's so many bad technology laws going through the legislative system nowadays that, I just don't have time to read through all of them. So maybe I'll trust one of my friends here to make decisions for me on that case. And the funny thing that happened is that every single political system that we have ever seen on Earth or throughout human history is a state within the system. So a dictatorship is basically everybody forwards their vote to one person. Of course, there's some coercion involved and that kind of thing, but just from a systems perspective, what's happening is everybody's giving this one guy their vote. And of course, then we have representative democracy, which is a kind of highly advanced form of dictatorship. Yeah. So, what about this? This is crazy, right? This is absolutely like, there's no way of paying, noticing, understanding what's going on here. But it's actually just what would happen if we just trust our friends. So there's a problem. If we have a cycle, then the votes are going around in circles. That's really, really bad. So we need to enforce a rule that it needs to be what's known as a directed acyclic graph. But if we have that, then there's certain people who make the decisions, and they do it with certain credence. So the people who have more votes forwarded to them get more of a say. And of course, this can change at any point in time. I might decide tomorrow that the guy I gave my vote in some issue is an idiot, and I don't want him to have my vote. Right? Pretty simple. So this was back in 2007, and back then, the country where I live, Iceland, was a vast economic empire. And then 2008 came, and not so much. Our economy failed pretty spectacularly. It lost about 17/18 of its mass over a course of about 3 weeks. And this led to a big social uprising where a lot of these ideas kind of started to catch on. So people started to ask themselves, can we build better tools than the traditional democratic system? And I'm going to tell you a bit about a few of them, and actually some that are outside of Iceland. So, we look to the internet. The internet is really cool. Have you been there? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, so the internet has helped us democratize mass media, and it's helped us democratize production, and it's helped us democratize knowledge. So we wonder, can it help us democratize democracy? And back in 2008, after talking to some people about this. One of my friends, Robert Bjarnason, he ran away with this idea and created the first version of what we dubbed the Shadow Parliament project. The idea was to gather all of the legislative proposals from the Icelandic Parliament and allow everybody to vote on them, everybody to make change proposals, everybody to comment on them and deliberate and just, kind of create a new parliament that runs alongside our traditional parliament, and anybody can contribute. And the idea was that at some point, if this kind of gathers mass, then one of two things is going to happen. Either the traditional parliament is going to start ignoring it, in which case they have really lost their democratic mandate, right? Or they start to adhere to it, they start to do exactly what the shadow parliament tells them to, in which case they've shown themselves to be redundant. Boom, we just replaced the traditional system. Of course, that didn't happen quite right away, but a few other things happened in the meantime. Some people, like a guy named Pudo, or called Pudo, built a system called adhocracy, which is based loosely on the same ideas. And the German Pirate Party took this and built another system called liquid democracy. And I like the way that they emphasized liquidity, the fact that democracy becomes liquid by this method. So they built this really pretty amazing system. It's really complicated and it's really hard to get it to work, but they really took the idea a bit further than it was intended in some cases, and there's some room for improvement in others. Sometime through this, some guys, Robert Bjarnason and Gunnar Grimsson, founded the Citizen Foundation, which was kind of intended to be like an umbrella for all of these ideas. And through it, we made, I've kind of been sitting on the fence with a lot of this, but they made a system called Betur Reykjavík, which was just, I don't know if you know anything about Icelandic politics. No, okay. So in 2010, a group of comedians and actors and musicians kind of took over the city of Reykjavik, and so now our mayor is a comedian who cross-dresses, and it's really fun. And when they got elected, the first thing that they did was rolled out this Betur Reykjavik system, where they promised that they would take the 6 best ideas for every month and implement them, regardless of what they are. Of course, they go into internal processes inside the executive arm, but it becomes like the deciders of what should be done becomes the general public. And through this, there's been recently a set of collaborative budgeting, that's the word, collaborative. It's really hard to remember collaboration in a conference called SHARE. But collaborative budgeting being, let's just take a bunch of money and see what people want to do with it. Really easy, just, elections. We also built this Better Iceland thing, which is kind of a rehash of the older Shadow Parliament. A bit better, a bit easier to navigate through, and a more generalized thing for anybody in the world called Your Priorities. Your Priorities is basically the same system, just adapted in such a way that each country in the world can go in there and just start their own shadow parliament. Really cute, right? But there's been problems with it. All of these systems, both the liquid democracy or liquid feedback system from the Pirates, the adhocracy system that Pudo made, and the open active democracy that the Citizens Foundation made, have all been really difficult to use in some ways. And it's a user interface problem, because we really focused on the what I now call liquidity aspect, the kind of ideological purity of how you distribute democracy. But we didn't really focus on the means, the ability of the general public to actually engage with these systems. So when I was in Morocco a couple of weeks ago, or months, I don't know, we were talking about this, and because the Moroccan Pirate Party had been very interested in setting up this liquid feedback system. And it turns out that the word for liquid in Arabic is wasa, but the word for means is wasail. So we thought, okay, this is the perfect name on which to take it to the next step. So now we're kind of working on this new system which is more focused on the user interface and user experience side and less on the ideological purity, because we've already got the ideological purity, haven't we? So there's other things that have been happening. In 2009 in Iceland, a bunch of people called the Anthill Collective decided to convene the first ever national meeting. It was, the idea was to just allow 1,500 people, randomly selected from the census, to come together for a day of deliberation. Just meet up and sit around tables. There were 7, I think, people around the table, and each table went through a process where they were writing out ideas, they were discussing them, and slowly but surely they came to lots of decisions. This was repeated in 2010 as the beginning of a constitutional process. So there the idea was get lots of people together, not just to talk about the future of Iceland in general, but also the future of the constitution of Iceland in particular. Like, what do we want to build out of into our new constitution? So lots of people gathered together, generated a lot of data just using statistical means. This is kind of a word cloud from it. And this fed into a constitutional process where 523 candidates from around the country offered themselves up to be a part of a 25-person constitutional assembly. And this assembly was, had the task of going through all of that data and turning it into a constitution. So that was all really cool. I lost the election, but we had lots of fun because Ella, my friend Ella and I came up with this really funky idea of taking the same technologies that we use. Oh, you might notice this is actually wrong, but taking the same technologies that we normally use to analyze security and do computational linguistics and threat modeling, and apply it to the idea of a constitution. So we worked very closely with the Constitutional Assembly on figuring out how to make the constitution do what it meant to do, rather than do what it making sure that the intent lines up with the wording of the document. And this turned out to be a very useful thing because you might have noticed there's a growth market in constitution making right now. There's so many countries that are going through constitutional processes, and each and every one of them has all sorts of factions that are fighting against each other to try and get whatever it is that they want into the constitutions. So having kind of an external process that goes through the security aspects and makes sure that it does what people want it to do would be really, really powerful. So I'm not going to tell you what the future holds for this, because I don't really know. I mean, all of this process has really taken me by surprise. I wrote this blog post, I wrote a bigger essay, and and that was back then. And now we have all of these interesting projects that mostly are completely out of my control. But I think the interesting lesson to learn here is that we have figured out that everybody can participate in politics in a way where they control their own level of participation. We don't need to force everybody to be a professional politician, and we don't have to believe in professional politics either. We can go the middle ground and just everybody participates as much as they want and leaves the rest up to their friends and peers and in a true internet fashion. So, yeah, that's about it. Thanks.